Welcome, everyone, to Episode 4 of the Essential Therapies podcast with Dr. Cindy. In today's episode, Dr. Cindy helps us to understand what is a myofascial intensive. She's actually still at the John Barnes Institute, otherwise known as the Sanctuary, for a couple more days this week. And so we go into great detail about understanding not only what is a myofascial intensive, but also the different types of treatments that go along with that. You know, why would you have multiple people working on someone at the exact same time? And a whole host of other interesting topics. So we hope you enjoy Episode 4, Essential Therapies Podcast with Dr. Cindy.
So here I am recording from Pennsylvania, in Malvern, Pennsylvania, where I am visiting this week and being a fill-in physical therapist at the John F. Barnes Myofascial Release Treatment Center, also known as the Sanctuary. So this is where John Barnes started his physical therapy career many years ago, and he has a very strong clinic here where there are many therapists specializing in myofascial release. So it is really an honor to be able to be one of the fill-in therapists here for when when I'm able to fit my schedule in and cover one of their therapists that's gone away for the week. So that's where I am. And the interesting thing is, just 10 days ago, I was here on the other side of the table, you could say, being a patient. So I mentioned that I came for a mini intensive, and since I've been talking about that, I've had a lot of people say, you know, what is a mini intensive? Was that kind of on your mind, Brad?
Yes, it was, for sure. Yeah, I didn't know what it was. I wasn't sure what in the world you were talking about. But yeah, I mean, of course, I understand it now, but yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So let me just say, one of the things that I've had people ask, well, what is an intensive? And so I thought, gosh, I guess that's a good idea to explain, because some people might think that, okay, intensive, does that mean the treatment is more intense, like it's harder or more forceful, or
Yeah.
whatever the thought is when you think of the word intensive. And so, no, it is definitely not that, because with myofascial release, we don't force the tissue. We meet the barrier and we wait in a very gentle way. So does not mean that the treatment technique itself is more intensive when we're getting an intensive, but what it means is that we're getting several sessions in a very short period of time. So typically you might think of going to get a myofascial treatment, once a week, maybe every other week, or maybe once a month, or maybe you're going to try to get through something in a couple of times a week for a few weeks. Well, this intensive treatment means that we're going to be doing several sessions a day, a few or several days in a row. So one of the things I love about coming here and being a fill-in therapist is the opportunity to work on patients who have, many times traveled a long way to come to this clinic and get these intensive sessions, meaning they're being seen 3 times a day, 5 days a week, for 2 weeks in a row if they're new to the program, and sometimes even more than 2 weeks. So there is the opportunity for a therapist who's taking the John Barnes courses to come for 1 week. But for the most part, like the people that I saw on Monday, they're here for 2 whole weeks. So they're
Wow.
just finished their third day. So
So
yeah, it's
2 whole
pretty
weeks. So how long is a typical session?
A session is an hour.
Okay.
Sometimes there might be 2 half-hour sessions, but
Yeah.
they're kind of split out that way only because one of those half-hour blocks would be for hands-on treatment. Another half-hour block might be for self-treatment education. So it's still like an hour, right? So you're going to have 3 one-hour sessions today. You're going to have 3 one-hour sessions probably tomorrow. So
Okay.
there are a couple of group sessions that happen as well, but for the most part, it's 3 sessions a day, and they can be spread out throughout the day. It just kind of depends on the schedule. I was asking Valerie, so I will fit this in here now. Originally, I had planned for Valerie McGraw, who is the chief physical therapist at the Sanctuary and the clinic manager. has worked for John Barnes for over 32 years. It might be 33 years now. And so it's just an amazing wealth of knowledge that she has and experience working with intensive patients for decades, literally. So, but we will have her back on, or have her on at another time to talk a little bit more about this. But what happens is the patients seek out intensive treatment when, session here or there isn't working, and we know that there's myofascial restriction. It's severe. There's these subconscious holding patterns that are there that are not being interrupted enough with a session here or there to make a lasting hold. Now, typically myofascial release, because we are actually focusing on the collagenous barrier that's holding or pulling the skeletal system, the organs, the nerves, the vessels, everything in the body, pulling it into a place of dysfunction and pain, we want to change and shift that holding pattern so that there's release and movement. Okay, so it's kind of like thinking of stepping on the garden hose, right? You step on it or kink it or set something on it, and the water doesn't come out the other end, so that's dysfunctional. So it takes, to take that foot off the garden hose. Maybe it can happen with, an easy couple easy sessions. If it's been there a long time, or it's really strong, or there's a lot of trauma there, it's going to take more. So what I see, couple of things. So I was just there, I mentioned. So that was a traumatic event that happened. It was pretty significant. So my body went into significant holding patterns of trauma. And what I was doing wasn't enough. So, getting a session here or there wasn't going to be enough. Going and getting several sessions. And I posted on that just the other day, and the pictures of before and after, and I don't know if we can throw that stuff in here or not. I'm not sure, video, but it's amazing because you could see how my body was pulled off. And then even with the little videos that we took of my gait on that first day, and then the gait on 3 days later, amazing change. And we couldn't have had that type of change with even 10 sessions over 10 weeks, I don't believe, because it would just, what happens is the body, we get 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. If we go too long, it might keep inching back. And I've been experiencing that with my own body, even since the mini intensive that I had. In fact, today I was driving back from working, and I was noticing that my bite is slowly kind of getting off again. So I need to do some self-treatment and it's still really in a much better place. So there was a significant treatment that I had on the last day, that Valerie, who I mentioned is going to be here at some point, had her fingers on the roof of my mouth in the way that I had my fingers on the roof of my mouth right after the accident, when I was still on the ground, as a matter of fact. And I went into this significant release, and my body started to tremble, and we call that the thawing response. It's a myofascial unwinding. I literally tasted blood in my mouth for a minute or so. It was like the tissue memory coming up, and I could taste that sensation of blood. It was absolutely the taste of blood. And I had the same, like the mouth pain really intensified. Now, before she started that treatment, I wasn't feeling that. So it was some significant holding of that trauma in the tissues, that cellular memory, that tissue memory that was releasing during that technique. After that technique, I closed my mouth, and it was unbelievable. It was completely changed from when she had started it. Now, I'm sure that I wouldn't have had that type of response if I hadn't had several hours of treatment really close right before that. So again, that's the power of an intensive. And then after that treatment, typically the way my bite pattern is, my left front tooth tends to touch my bottom teeth. Well, since the accident, when that right side was really compressed in, that wasn't happening anymore. It was the right side, and things were really off. After that mini intensive, I was back to that typical pattern that I've had for 20 years or more, where that left tooth was touching. It's just amazing, and so that's not something that shifts so easily with a session here or there. Is that starting to make sense? Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Yeah, it's just amazing to me that there's, that effect is that, that extreme. I
Yeah.
mean, to do that and to understand how to do that, and it's wild to me.
Even this week, seeing patients who have significant restriction. Okay. And as a therapist, when I'm working on someone, there's so many things that I just like want to get my hands all over it. It's like, oh, but I'm gonna do this technique. This is part of the body that's talking to me first. And that's one of the neat things about myofascial release and the John Barnes method is that it's not a cookie cutter protocol kind of thing. It's not like, okay, every person who comes in, we're going to do this and we're going to do this technique and this technique. We look at the body and we see what is showing up. Like, where are the restrictions that are really key that we need to start with? And that's new every single time. John has the saying, if you know what you're going to do before you walk into the room as the therapist, then you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So if you think you know what you're doing when you walk in, you don't know what you're doing, because we need to read the body and see what's going on. So in an intensive situation, and I'm evaluating the patient, I'm seeing what needs, and I'm drawn to an area of significant restriction that I can work there, but I'm feeling all this other stuff at the same time, like, oh,
Hmm.
it might be on the right thigh, okay, but I'm really feeling another thing up here in the diaphragm, so I want to go there. And so maybe I feel like I have enough time to spend on each area, because I know I get to go back to that area, or the next therapist that comes in, they get to go to this next area, and I can give it the time and attention that it needs, and then I can go to that next area quickly before things change. So, if we do 1 hour and I get to this one space and then the person goes off and does their normal life for the next 2 weeks and then they come in again, everything has changed.
Right.
Those deep holding patterns are still there, but if I could have just kept going, I could go to this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, then I'm going to make some real headway. And
Sure.
that's what happens when we do these intensive treatments. Now, sometimes, we get through a lot of stuff and it brings up some old trauma and pain patterns. And
Mm.
after this is why they require patients to come for a couple of weeks, especially when they're new to this work. You can kind of get stirred up during that first week. The patterns are starting to unravel, things are changing. I experienced a significant headache pain after my first day when I was here a couple weeks ago. I said a
Yeah.
significant headache, but I trust that process. I know what this is about, so it was okay. I didn't even take anything for it. I allowed myself to feel what was going on, and continued to work on myself, and I went to bed early. And so the next
Hmm.
day I wake up, I still had some headache. I went in for some more treatment. After the first treatment, that headache was gone, and then we were into something else. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. The nice thing about doing the intensive, then, if they're a patient who may have that tendency to have this chaos, so to speak, come up, or what we call a healing chaos, or a traumatic, not traumatic, it would be more of a therapeutic pain type of situation.
Hmm.
And your next appointment isn't for another week. The body's gonna may start to adapt again.
Yeah.
So now we've got to do like another 15, 20, 30 more minutes to kind of get back to where we were the last time you were
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
ultimately what ends up happening, and people come, oh, it's so expensive, I don't know if I can do that. Well, first of all, some of these patients that we've seen just seriously transform during an intensive.
Mm.
They would say it's worth the investment, because it really is an investment, in your health, to be able to get the work done that you need in an amount of time that's really going to make the most significant change. In the end, you actually save money because you're not spreading things out so long.
Right.
But not only that, you're getting a much better outcome and a result, because we were able to really get to these things, you know, more so.
Sure.
Um, One of the things that, people often say, how do I know if I need an intensive? I've heard this question. So the
Yeah.
first thing was, okay, what does intensive mean? So it's number one, it's not, more intense technique. It's many hours close together. Okay, that's what makes it intensive. How do you know if you need one? Well, honestly, probably everybody needs one, right? But it's not, as far as someone, how do they know if they want to really make that expensive step?
Yeah.
And really, I don't think of it as expensive when you realize there are patients, and this is what we see all the time. Okay, they've been to multiple doctors, had surgeries, or they're trying to avoid surgery.
Hmm.
They've tried physical therapy, they've tried medications, they've tried the pain block. Okay, there's a lot of cost involved in all of that.
Sure.
And let's just step outside of the actual just dollar amount and consider all of the other intrinsic costs of not being able to do things that you would like to be able to do because of the pain or dysfunction that you're in. When if you had some intensive treatment of myofascial release, you might be able to work through that so that you don't have that pain and dysfunction. And now you're actually able to enjoy life better. You get to do things with your kids or your grandkids, or the activities that you wanted to do. Or maybe you can avoid a huge surgical process, which is going to put you in a worse situation. It's not uncommon at all. I mean, multiple patients I've seen who've had more than one back surgery, for example.
Mm.
And it's sad to me because what I'll see is, I hear their story, and I hear little threads of, wow, if I could have seen them before that first surgery, the trauma that they talked about that they had a couple years before that surgery sounds like a myofascial restriction thing to me.
Hmm.
And if I could have had an opportunity to work on that before they had the surgery, then this round, that we're experiencing now would be a heck of a lot different,
Sure it
as
would.
far, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes total sense. I think a lot of it for me in just hearing how you explain that is it just goes back to quality of life. I mean
Exactly.
that's huge because like it's the everyday stuff, and you don't want to have to live with, pain or discomfort if you don't have to. And so to go to this and get a treatment and get the intensive, yeah, I mean that's huge. I mean, if it's going
Hmm.
to impact you every single day, and I mean, why wouldn't you try it?
Hmm. So for people who are new to this work, here's something I often hear, and I've been doing this for 27 years, and I've really been focusing on mostly just this for over 20 years. Actually, over 23 years, I meant to say, is when people get this work, they'll say, "Wow, this feels right."
Mm.
Like this is different, and this is
Hmm.
different than the other therapies I've had. I see people all the time who've been through 2, 3, 4 or more rounds of physical therapy, and sometimes traditional physical therapy works. That's great. I'm talking about when it doesn't,
Yeah.
it's because this fascia hasn't been addressed. So there's a sense of it feels right, but maybe they're not getting better as quickly as they would like, or maybe the benefits aren't lasting quite as long as we would like to see. It's usually because we can't get to enough things in a short enough period of time, because this has gone on so long in this person's life. Okay,
Hmm.
whether or not they were symptomatic. Okay, we could have had it because the body adapts, and people go out of their body in a sense that they know how to turn the pain off.
Yeah. Or they just get
It,
used to it. They're immune. They
yeah, they
just
just get
they just
used to
deal
it.
with
It's
it.
like, this is
Yeah.
what it is. Okay, I'm
Hmm.
aging. It's just supposed to be this way.
Yep.
No, it's
Yep.
not supposed to be that way. And so they desensitize themselves, right? And so sometimes that goes on for many years. And when we start working with someone, even though it feels right, there's a lot of, maybe they don't feel great when they leave that first time or
Hmm.
the sixth time, right? There's a little mini improvements, and this is definitely going in the right direction, and we can see the change, but it's not so profound that they're like, oh yay, jumping all around in 5 treatments. But there's something that they can tell is better, and they've tried everything else, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So these few things that I'm bringing up, those are key signs that someone would benefit from an intensive or a
Okay.
mini intensive. Now, the only concern about a mini intensive that I have is that we do start to get through some stuff. It's kind of like what John said in the interview I did with him about intensives, which I think we posted the link last week.
We did.
Is, they can get stirred up. It can turn them away from the work if they don't understand the process. So part of why I wanted to talk about this is that this is really important. If you're starting to get treatment, sometimes I have people come a few times and they drop off the schedule because, oh, that didn't make me feel, all great at first. Well, especially for those who are extremely restricted, that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't mean it's not working. It means they really need this work,
Yeah.
especially when nothing else is working, or they're
Sure.
just popping pills all the time and they're masking the pain, or they're just having to ignore that it's there.
Yeah.
So, if someone comes for, 6 treatments in a short period of time or 10 treatments and they're kind of stirred up, but we as therapists feel things changing and we can feel there's still restriction there, my recommendation is to listen to the skilled therapist, because they're familiar with this. And it might mean, okay, maybe you can't do another intensive right at the moment, but you do another session, you keep your sessions going, and you really work on that self treatment, which is one of my favorite things to teach, because that's what I needed for years when I first started doing this work. There was no one around here to get myofascial release from. So I had to travel to get it, or I had to go to courses. And I thankfully was learning a lot on my own just from the other types of work that I was doing. This is, over 23 years ago. I was taking extensive yoga instructor training. I was an exercise physiologist. I knew my body really well. And I was putting techniques together to treat myself and feeling those releases. And there's a lot that we can do, as I've talked about quite a bit the last, first uh, session and the last few, but you can only do so much yourself. You need that help and that assistance of another therapist or of a therapist to help guide you through.
Hmm.
The other really cool thing that happens here also at the sanctuary and that we do at Essential Therapies is co-treatments. So on occasion you'll have more than one therapist in the room working on you. You could have, 4 hands on you or 6 hands on you. And so
Wow.
we can really start to take up the slack of all of this restricted tissue and exponentially affect that outcome. It's sometimes 2 therapists isn't, double the technique. It's exponentially better. So it's pretty exciting to be able to experience that. And here this week there's a student, there's a seminar called the Skill Enhancement Seminar that John Barnes offers. And that's when you pay to come in and work with the other therapists at the clinic, see what their techniques are like. We can give the students a lot of cues on how to hold their bodies for the best biomechanics for themselves so they're not overstraining. People ask me all the time, aren't you exhausted by the end of the day? Because I'm like, and I don't like to take breaks. I just like pretty much go through. I might take 15 minutes for lunch or something. And because I know how to hold my body in such a way that I'm not hurting myself. And it's so enjoyable. It's just part of this work is kind of tapping into the energy field, and I feel like I'm actually getting energized. I've learned how to not take on the effects of the patient or anything that's going to bring me down. I actually feel very energized by the end of the day. So that's a really cool thing about this work too, is that we can learn, and that's what those students do. We can learn how to improve and grow ourselves as being the therapist. And I tell people, I work on myself all day long around the table. I get myself in different positions as I'm working on them. I'm lengthening myself and learning how to release into that, and it's good for me too. So
Sure.
it's kind of a fun
Huh.
thing.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I know then that's right along with what I've heard, like a lot of surgeons, that will do a 10-hour surgery, they have to be position themselves in such a way, or, and they work out quite a bit just to be able to, have the muscle to be able to do those types of things. So
Right.
it's interesting. You say you sort of change your stance, or you change the way you're standing, or what have you. That makes,
Mhm.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You'd have to, I would think. So
Speaking of that, there's probably several surgeons who could use some myofascial release on a
I'm
regular
sure there
basis, right?
are. I'm
I'm
sure
sure
there are.
they're very good at cutting out that sense of their bodies talking to them, because we all have that as well. So
Right. Yeah, for
so
sure.
any other thoughts that you ever questions you have about this whole idea of an intensive?
Yeah. So when you have, multiple people, in the room at like the same time, I mean, is there sort of a limit to how many people can work on somebody? I mean, like you said, 2 or 3 people. I mean, is that sort
Right.
of, I mean, can you have
So
more, and
yeah,
why would you want to have more?
right. So well, let me go back to when I was first met John and was doing the seminars, and I went and got my first intensive. And I was having severe migraine headaches at the time. In fact, just thank you for bringing this up. It's probably a good idea to share this. So I was having severe migraine headaches like most days of the month, taking drugs that are Imitrex or Maxalt. If anybody out there has migraines, they would know what those are. And I just couldn't get past it. So I decided to have an intensive. Well, I went to Sedona, and John was working that week, so I got to have him work on me. Well, whenever John is working, that's when students want to sign up for their skill enhancement, right? Because they want to learn from John. So there were four, and the most that they would take for students at a time is four. So there'd be four students and John. So do the math there with the set of hands. So I get 10 hands on you in a room. And I really needed a lot of work then. I had a lot of stored emotion and trauma and restriction, and had ignored my body for years, and I was extremely tight. So what was so interesting, it would get so hot in the room. So all of these therapists, and they have hands on you. So it's like, okay, take this area. And, pretty soon you've got like your arms and legs are being pulled, or you have a pressure on your belly or your thigh or your back and your head. And, I would imagine for some people that would be like, oh my gosh, the idea of that is horrifying, because some people do have, issues with being touched like that, or it's a challenge for them,
Sure. It's different.
and
Yeah.
it was definitely new for me. I didn't know what to expect, but wow. I mean, when I started to experience that, I think the best way that I can put it is I felt a sense of just caring. Like there was this immense sense of love in a way of, here are all of these hands with the intention on me to help me feel good again.
Yeah.
And it was a first for me on many levels, and to be able to then feel so safe that I could let go and even experience emotion that was trapped in my body,
Mm.
trauma, and all kinds of different things, and to walk out of there. I mean, I didn't feel so good that week, to be honest with you. There's a lot of stuff coming up for me, and but I could feel glimpses of things changing. It was really empowering to me, and I trusted the work, and I knew from taking courses and everything and being educated. Of course, back then there wasn't very much information around. The internet wasn't like it is, and you weren't finding out anything. So I was just learning from going to courses, and which was really the best way, because you can get a lot of misinformation on the internet, as we all know. I would
Sure.
go through these sessions and just feel drained in some ways, but also very empowered, and I could feel free in different parts of my body that I had never experienced or hadn't experienced in years.
Wow.
And after that, and I've talked about this in other venues, but that was February of that year, and this is over 20 years ago, and I hadn't been able to do my regular activities for about a year and a half. I hadn't been able to exercise. I had done marathons before and triathlons. Really enjoyed Olympic distance triathlons, and hadn't been able to do any of that. Just simple
Mm.
walking. I was barely getting through my workday, because I was doing this work, but I was not being treated because there was nobody around Toledo doing this work.
Yeah.
So John said to me at the time, what is it you'd like to be able to do? I said, I'd like to do triathlon again. And because I knew if I was able to do that, I would be able to do lots of other things. And it was in June when I did my next one. And he encouraged me to just be open to that, see myself do it, feel it, like the visualization, like we had talked about before.
Hmm.
And that allowed me to be open, and I really think that, along with all of that intensive treatment in such a short period of time, and then me continuing that with my own self treatment, is what really catapulted me through those tough days. And, there was a time I thought I would never go without headaches again. I mean, 2 or 3 times a week, or more, I was having migraine headaches. And,
Wow,
you
that's a
know,
lot.
yeah, I mean, the only headaches I've had have been because of the bicycle accident recently, obviously, and it's amazing how I had that short headache during the intensive, and then it went away. I didn't have headaches. Yeah, it's incredible. So, you know, there's so much out there in the way of relief with myofascial release, and it's impossible. When we talk to Valerie, she has seen so much. I mean, and not just Valerie, but the other therapists who've worked at John's clinic, and just because they see so many people and they see these intensive patients. And when I was doing a lot of intensives years ago, like 20 years ago, I was doing this intensives for a couple of years. I did them. They were being seen for 20 hours a week, but
Wow.
just for one week. So we get through a lot of stuff in one week. And when you see people shift like that, you can see and be open to what's possible. And as therapists, when we feel a body and we can tell that it feels more like concrete and less like jello, that's not a great sign, but we also know the good news about that is there's a lot that we can affect, and we can certainly help them in a huge way. And it is discouraging once in a while when we're like, oh, we know that we can help this person, but they're so stuck for so many years that it's going to take a lot of understanding on their part to trust this process. And it's going to take a lot of work and just patience.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would imagine that's a lot of communication, with the patient too, to find out what
Right.
their history is and make sure they understand the process, and
Hmm.
a lot that it sounds like a lot goes into that, for education, I guess, to
Hmm.
help them understand, okay, here's what's expected, here's the time frame, but yeah, having multiple people work on you at the same time it's fascinating because you don't ever see that, at least not that I've ever heard. And I'll say
Right.
other more traditional methods of massage type of application. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's very, very interesting how that all works.
Yeah. And when we have these seminars, there's this big, conference room of therapists, and usually there's a group technique, and then
Yeah.
we also, at Essential Therapies, we'll get together and have what we call teach and treats, where the therapists get together and we work on each other, and then I'm also educating, or we're educating each other. It's there's
Yeah.
so many different ways to experience this work too. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
definitely is life changing.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I'm sure we'll learn, way more in future episodes about different techniques and how they apply and all sorts of different things. And I think we're gonna have Valerie on, in just a few episodes, to talk about some of the things that, like you said, that she has seen, and she can lend, some information there as well.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
the whole idea of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, and I know that it's going to be for a very specific group of people that are seeking this out, but it's about improving and increasing awareness of this, especially the John F. Barnes myofascial release techniques, and other things that fall under essential therapies, right? But I think this area is so important because it's so unique, it's so different. It's not the traditional, medical thing. Still, even after 50 years of John teaching this work, and how we hear, oh, now people are familiar with fascia. Okay, some of the
Hmm.
and they're getting is accurate, some of it's not so accurate. So when you hear someone talk about myofascial release, I'm learning even more now that that could mean many different things. And so I want to improve and increase awareness of the John Barnes myofascial release techniques because it is very unique. And yeah, there are a lot of therapies you wouldn't want to do intensive treatments on, So if and this is a very unique, very special type of treatment. And one of the things that comes to my mind is something that John said at the very first seminar I took, and that is that it all comes back to love. This is about caring for the bodies out of a space of an energy of love. And not avoiding what's going on inside the body, but turning inward and feeling and loving our bodies and caring for them in that way. And so, yeah, it is tough to get an intensive sometimes. I mean, it's for some people, it's very hard to go through the process because you're really focused for several days. It can be costly, but can you really put a price on health and wellness and being able to feel good? I mean, it's tough. And when I talk to people who've been through, surgery after surgery and medications and all of these things, you can't really put a cost on it.
Yeah, 100%. That's for sure. Yeah,
So
yeah. And I
I'm just
think
glad
there's
it's available.
and what you said, it's interesting because you said you want to educate people, and bring more awareness to the work, but it's not new. Like you said, this has been going on for years and years and years and years, but it's just sort of now becoming sort of mainstream, if you will, and more into the acceptance and all those different types of things as people learn to appreciate trying alternative methods. Whether you want to call this an alternative method or not, but to a lot of people, it probably will seem that way. But again, it's interesting because it's not new. It's been practiced, like you said, for 50 years.
Right.
So it's established. It it works. It's just sort of bringing it to the mainstream and educating people about the importance and the effectiveness of these techniques.
Exactly. And the fact that myofascial release isn't all the same. And that's what we
Mhm.
will be talking about, I think, next time. So I'm looking forward to 2 more days of treating here in Malvern and seeing how the patients that I've been able to help, how they change even in the next 2 days. I mean, what's happened even in from Monday to Wednesday today, from Monday to Wednesday this week has really been exciting. I just love it.
Good, good. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more. I'm sure the listeners are too. So, yeah, until next time,
Okay.
this is the Essential Therapies Podcast with Dr. Cindy.
Thanks. Bye.
See ya.